Hi, it's Jack Sweeney, your host of the CFO Thought Leader podcast, and we're speaking with Gary Cokins, the well-known author inside the realm of analytics and enterprise performance management. Gary, good to have you with us, and welcome.
Thanks for inviting me, Jack.
Well, thank you for accepting our invitation. Gary is in our green room, and he'll be joining us here shortly. Today, he'll be narrowing his lens on this area of driver-based budgeting and rolling forecasts. For so many financial executives, this is really dead center where they're spending their time these days and perhaps not always getting the results they would hope. Where would you like to begin, Gary? What will you be sharing with us?
Well, first, I think there's now a growing consensus that the annual budgeting process is broken. I mean, there's a lot of humor about it. It tends to be take months to prepare, and it's obsolete in a couple of months after it's published. It caves into the loudest voice and strongest muscle of some of the managers who know how to basically pad their budget. What really bothers me the most is when a manager is a few months away from the end of the year and they're not on a glide path to spend all of their budget. What do they start doing? They start spending it needlessly and foolishly. We call it use it or lose it behavior. And part of that is because oftentimes the next year's budget is based on a cost center spreadsheet that's pegged to what their projection spending at the end of the year is going to be, and they incremented a few percentages, and it's tend to be really not sensitive to volume increases, and it's clearly not connected to the strategy of the executive team. So the question is, what do we do to basically resolve that? And I'm going to basically walk through what I think is a way to get rid of this consolidation of spreadsheets up, down, up, down. The executives don't like the first one. They tweak it. They send it back down. You almost wish the executives would say, what number do you want in the first place? But what we want with really driver-based approaches is to be more realistic. So the way I view the way to basically move towards driver-based and using performance management methods is to start with basically two river streams. And I'm going to put the two river streams here. The upper river stream is which is coming at an organization, is the repeatable recurring work, and it's demand-driven. The non-repeatable work is the lower stream, and there's three types of projects that cause that, and we'll get to those in a second. A way to basically address the repeatable work is really to do what industrial engineers have done all along. Volume and mix times unit consumption rate equals resources required, supply capacity required, headcount and spend. And that areas where we basically use sort of activity-based costing principles or view unit consumption rates to basically project the needed supply. For the non-repeatable work, there's really three sources of projects. There's capital projects, and all CFOs are familiar with those. There's also strategy-related projects, and those ideally should come from using the strategy mapping and balanced scorecard methodology. The strategy map, in my mind, is 20 times more important than the balanced scorecard. It's just a feedback mechanism. The GPS is in those strategic objectives, which most people are familiar with in the strategy map. But with each of those objectives, one would identify, well, what are the projects and initiatives that we could accomplish the strategic objective, or in some cases, the core process we need to improve. So that's going to be those projects. And then there's the risk management. We've got to get enterprise risk management into the picture. And the enterprise risk management community is increasingly using a technique. They kind of have a grid where the vertical axis is the severity of the impact, low to high. The horizontal axis is the probability of it occurring, from low probability on the left, high on the right. And if you're visualizing this matrix this grid I just described, if you're in the upper right half, it's high probability and highly impactful. You want to basically mitigate the risk. So if all of that is really being calculated, it's going to, if you will, pile up into really some good numbers. So now let me really dive deep and decompose the diagram I described. First, focus in the bottom right shaded box, where it says derived budget. That's really going to be a good number, should be a valid number. Look at its four inputs. Coming from the top, that's the repeatable river stream, is the operational budget. And then from the left, you see the three other ones that I mentioned: risk budget, strategy budget, and capital budget. I'm not going to walk through all of the individual boxes, just a few. Let's focus first on the operational budget. You'll notice that coming from the management accounting system are the consumption rates. Those are really a critical. And then from the left going into that box is the forecast. And increasingly organizations are getting more and more accurate with forecasting techniques. So when you combine the consumption rates, remember that volume and mix times rate equals capacity supplied. That gives us the capacity. What is the head count? What are the number of pounds? What are the kilograms? All of that stuff. And then we monetize it, whether it's euros or dollars or whatever is the foreign currency. That's going to be a pretty good number coming in as long as the forecast is reasonably accurate. Then from the left side, all of those boxes there, the non-repeatable, we've got strategy maps, we've got that risk grid that the ERM people put together, and that's going to produce those pretty good numbers. What is the cost of the projects for the strategy? See, now we've connected strategy with the budget, which typically is disconnected. And we get the other three in as well. I defy people to tell me that number in the bottom right is going to be a bad number. It's certainly going to be much better than this consolidating up of spreadsheets, which is kind of a cumbersome task, for any the accounting firm or accounting department or budgeting anyway. Finally, if you look at that diamond on the right, it says, is it acceptable or not? Well, typically, executives, when they see the number, just like the old traditional way, they're not going to like that number. So what's their temptation? Well, let's go eliminate some of those projects, some of those risk projects, or some of the strategy projects. That would be a bad thing to do, because you need those strategy projects to basically accomplish strategy. That's the biggest frustration of executives, failure to execute the strategy. We also need the risk mitigation. So what lever should we go to? The consumption rates. Put in 2%, 3%, 5% productivity improvement in the processes, and that will basically be the way to basically get to the number the executives want. So that, Jack, in a nutshell, is driver-based. Oh, and then, because the budget tends to be out of date, if you have automated all of this, you can then refresh the model with forecast quarterly, maybe even monthly, and the calculations take care of themselves. Really, the only independent variable in this is the forecast. All the rest of them are dependent variables. So, Jack, that's it in a nutshell, how driver-based budgeting and rolling financial forecast works.
A nutshell for sure. So, Gary, thanks so much for joining us.
Jack, it was a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.